I would like then to thank again the two persons in charge of the organization of the conference for inviting me once again to re-enter this familiar but changing setting of the office space and to revisit the various ways in which administrative activity can be defined, inhabited, organized, or dreamt of. As an actual space and as an imaginary space, the office was significantly transformed, as you all know, at the end of the 19th century, and it has undergone several more such transformations since. I will not develop the particularly rich and innovative work about the office as an object, pretext, and resource in contemporary art. It was the subject of the conference organized in Jena by Hans Christian von Ehrmann and Sven Spiker. The name of the colloquium was The Office in the Studio, Das Büro im Atelier. But unfortunately, we don't have publications coming from that work. I just wanted to mention to you the book written by Sven Spiker, The Big Archive, Art from Bureaucracy at MIT Press. That is a very interesting book you should look at if you want to go into the question of the office and art and the relationships they just did have. I will be in a much more concrete office, the office of the workers, and as you may know. Located at the heart of capitalist transformations and mode of government, the office is occupied and reoccupied, transformed and reorganized. The office could be utopia or nightmare. It is a space with ideal forms and volumes, or a very constrained reality for millions of men and women. Are we talking about a dusty, paper-filed office? We had just the last conference remember us how it could be dusty, the offices, even up to the beginning of the 20th century. Or are we speaking of that hygienist, rationalized and standardized one? Answers to this question differ in space and time, depending also on the point of view and the inherently different experiences of those who design and prescribe and of those who work and produce. We add several terms: bureau, Deutsch, French, office, bureau-salle, pool dactylo, en français, typing pool, Bürolandschaft, bureau paysager, open plan office. One place, several words that we used to listen to during these 2 days, and several ways to occupy that space. These 3 words, office, typing pool, open plan office, correspond to 3 periods in the history of capitalism, 3 periods in the history of the development of administrative work, 3 architectural and organizational forms of expression and performance. The similarities and variations of naming, typing pool, pool dactylo, Bürolandschaft, open plan office, reflect also the circulation of models and organizational forms from one country to the other. The influence of Taylorism in Europe in the early 20th century, the converging modes of capitalist development, the generative capacity of architectural forms as organizational and social forms. Beyond these, the evolutions that I have just mentioned, contrasting situations coexist in each European economy. Between 1880 and 1950, the office and administrative work covered various realities that might differ from one type of industry to another, within a neighborhood, and from one company to or administration to another. This is a fact that the growing influence of rationalist and functionalist methods and the development of the big business cannot overcome. British historian of technology David Edgerton argues that the history of technology tends to take for granted the fact that every innovation sweeps away the previous one. And yet, the old coexists with the new, more than sometimes heroic narratives of economic and technological transformations is ready to acknowledge. A second remark follows that first comments. Despite the Americanization of organizational forms and production methods, the specific cultures of European societies have shaped the employee and the social space of the office in their own particular ways. The Beamte and the Fonctionnaire have durably shaped the figure of the private employee in the German and French setting. As evidenced in the work of Jürgen Kotka on the German case, a bureaucratic tradition, the importance given to public administration influences the social characteristics of the private employee, Angestellte. Amt, government office, and Anstellung, employment, are closely related terms until the mid-19th century. The employé, Angestellte, designates a person who received wages and has a stable job. Gradually, civil servants, Beamte, are distinguished from those who receive wages, Angestellte, separating the world of the public bureaucracy from that of the employees of the industrial, banking, and business sectors. In my work, I have highlighted a similar semantic and social genealogy in the French context. Considered at first as the person who occupies a job in the 19th century, the word employé designates a person who occupies a function, le fonctionnaire. The employé is first and foremost the office worker, and the office refers to administrative vocabulary, a subdivision of public service, elements of an administrative unit. So, as you can see, you had very strong previous bureaucratic tradition in the German and the French context that did contaminate the way the public considered what an employee was, and that was, in fact, not necessarily the real condition of life of those who became private employees in other industries. What were the definition? What were the qualities attached to the fonctionnaire or employee in that perspective? Job security, regular salary raises, recognition of the job title, and a pension plan. This questionable reality was deeply transformed by the developments of the last third of the 19th century, which saw a considerable, increase in the number of administrative jobs in the banking, insurance, business, and industrial sectors. As we have just seen with the Belgian case during the conference, government offices and ministries are spaces that were kept to one side, apart from other kind of transformation, even if they were concerned with transformation. These spaces must not be mistaken with the developing public service, particularly the postal service. We had the example yesterday on the postal German service. The office of the state bureaucrat is mocked and at the center of many controversies, and mainly literary controversies. It is a main figure of literature during the 19th century, the bureaucrat in all languages, as far as I could say. And no, I am speaking under the control of those who did speak about that the last 2 days. It becomes an object that elites wish to reform as early as the end of the 18th century and through the 19th century. John Agar, in his groundbreaking book, The Government Machine, gives a detailed analysis of the machineries of government. At the end of the 19th century in England, I try to quote him. I did read the book, but I didn't have the book by me, so I have to retranslate from French to English, something that should not be the real original quotation in English, so forgive me. British governance came to depend not on previous gentleman codes of conduct, but on rational, professional, mechanically objective routines of specialist expertise. In that sense, the sense Agar suggests, mechanization as mechanical routine work preceded mechanization as an application of technology. It is thus suggested that technological and democratic modernity was less a result of material transformations than of a preceding mechanical nature of bureaucratic work being so involved in a certain kind of change. How can one account for novelty in administrative matters? For the most part, and even if John Agar's interesting arguments cannot be ignored, the new emerged from the United States and the business world. Most of the historiography agrees about that point. The United States have been the birthplace of a series of major converging technological and managerial innovations in the office environment, starting in the 80s, 70s, and 80s of the 19th century. As I have already attempted to show, technological, cognitive, and managerial innovations are equally important. The invention, sogenannte invention of the typewriter, I mean by that invention, the shaping of Scholl's typewriter as an office instrument, goes hand in hand with the new use of loose leaf sheets and carbon paper. What matters is how material technologies and cognitive tools converge for a unique cause, which is to accelerate the production regime of paperwork and strongly increase writing capacities, as Till Heilmann did show us last days. This cause, I don't know how you say cause in English, because cause is French, so cause, this cause, cette cause, this claim, this is, among other things, the result of the technological and economic reasoning of the time. It is also advocated and supported by propagandists, authors, and theorists. Ark Wilkinson Shaw and his Shaw-Walker Company, the self-proclaimed inventor of systems, is one of the major spokespersons, agent or actant in Bruno Latour's vocabulary, of this story. Indeed, the notion of system is essential even before this concept was reformulated in a strictly orthodox manner from the perspective of Taylorism by Leffringwell. So Shaw did invent another concept of system before Leffringwell and did it in both an ideological and technical way, developing this industry around carte index, cabinet pensant, filing cabinets, and all the equipment of the office. But also he did founded the very important review system, which became Business Week. As a good historian, I hope, historian of technology, I do of course know that loose leaf paper or card indexed were not invented in the United States any more than elsewhere. If you just remember the presentation of our colleague who lived, so Tobias, I try to have the name of the people, but it's very complicated to do all that, Tobias Pfeiffer, Helke, genau, yeah. About art collection, drawing art collection, we could claim that part of these technologies were invented in libraries. So you have a huge convergence at the end of the 19th century of technological invention coming from different sides and different worlds. And historians of library techniques and tools did insist on the importance that was 19th century and the end of the 19th century in the invention of these new filing cabinets, paper disconnected one from the other, so index cards, way of putting information in these cards and so on. Dating an invention is always a difficult task in itself and not so interesting, as you know. In the same spirit, the pioneers of duplication techniques, I'm sorry because I spent so many years trying to find all these inventors and to look at the way they socialize their instrument and those who did have success and those who were just forgotten. So some of them, the duplications, so les duplicateurs du boulot, Gestetner, so they were as much Hungarian, British, French as American. The logic of innovation needs to be assessed and analyzed for each economy under consideration. And I think that during these 2 days, we had access to the very locality of these stories. But analyzing national configurations should not prevent us from highlighting the convergence that initially operates in the American context. That is where a set of technological and non-technological propositions are fully realized by virtue of the redeployment of the business world. This is for the main part where technical and social narratives and uses are shaped and tested, where technological lines are born, where new ideas are marketed, referring to this period new science, the science of marketing, which is contemporary to our object and which has been studied, for instance, by Frank Cauchois. How the most important European societies went into a similar capitalist logic to the United States still remains to be established in detail. What many contributions have shown during the past 2 days is the specific dynamics of each country, with the corresponding logic of technology and innovation and the specifics and non-specifics of modernizing propositions that exist. The issue of the circulation, appropriation, and reshaping of technological and organizational propositions remains open to investigation and a source of interest. The administrative revolution did indeed occur in Europe, but followed diverse chronological lines. It also shows itself in various ways in the visible space of the city, like we saw it during the last presentation in a very stimulating way. Here, the issue will be more the office as an exterior than the office as an interior. The city of London, at the end of the 19th century, was a stage of such architectural and urban transformations. The banking district on the Boulevard des Italiens in Paris, where the Crédit Lyonnais headquarters are located, is another example. Banking represents the top level in the hierarchy of office job in terms of pay and social prestige. Like modern-day cathedrals, bank headquarters were demonstrations of the power of the new company and that of the new economy. A few decades after the triumphant architectural grandeur of the Grand Magasin, department stores, who had redefined the urban usage of Paris Boulevard or London main streets. However, my feeling is listening to stories from Bogota or the United States and looking at what did happen in Europe, that 19th centuries and early 20th centuries bore no comparison with a gigantic building in Europe. In Europe you couldn't find such huge transformation that did occur in the American context or on the American, South American and Latin American world. The transformation of city landscapes resulting from modernist rationalizing and functionalist projects was carried out on the old and the new continent, following very different timelines and with differing intensity. We should, I think, multiply the mapping of the administrative revolution, recover the heritage, draw a tertiary archaeology of European and American cities, and consider the horizontal and vertical dimensions of this scaling up. I am really happy to have had the opportunity to listen to your conference and also the Christine Neitman contribution, because when I did work on the office, I was feeling quite alone and missing the architectural part of the story and was not able to draw it and to begin to work on it as in itself. We know that the scaling up process is at the heart of the historical redefinition of administrative work. The period between 88 and 1950 is characterized by a dramatic increase in the number of administrative jobs and employees, who represent an increased percentage of the labor force of each country and generate a higher share of the economy through their so-called unproductive activities. Here we are confronted with an economic and cognitive challenge. How can we comprehend, assess, and characterize the product of that which is not considered as a product, that is not transformed into material goods? The issue is all the more complex in that a significant proportion of these fast-growing administrative activities are performed at the heart of the production sphere in companies, bringing those new spaces and spaces of novel-looking offices within the factory environment. Let us go back just a little in time. Since the seminal work of Alfred Chandler and Johann Yates, we know that the key places of capitalist transformation in the United States, starting from the mid-19th century, are, on one hand, the railroad companies, and on the other hand, the large department stores and mail order companies. In the United States, as well in Europe, these spaces are the stage for the invention of a different definition of administrative work. Here is an unprecedented concentration of information and data processing and the technological, spatial, and organizational form required for their implementation. The European counterpart to Sears, Roebuck and Company, la Manufacture d'Armes et de Cycles de Saint-Étienne in France, had 3,000 employees in 1908, about 100 typists, 20 sections of commercial services, a vast original phone system linking every office and store, and at the time, this factory with direct sale to consumers was one of the rare examples of a large-scale typing pool in Europe. Other mixed spaces underwent tremendous changes, where the distinction was made difficult between handling administrative blue-collar, white-collar work. I refer here to utility or railroad companies. This is where a specific information processing economy emerged, supported by specific cognitive tools and techniques. These are used to manage customer accounts, to track the composition of train, or to manage traffic. Here, the frontier between blue and white collars is not clear. The nature of the activities, the material aspects involved in their implementation alter the role and corresponding social status of the employees. Just like in the mixed space of industry, commerce, and administration, such as a large mail order store, and of course, as we have seen also, we should remember that it began also in public service through the postal services in each country. Lastly, the development of administrative work in large-scale industrial companies, such as the car manufacturer Renault, which I investigated in detail from the creation of the company until the 30s, have radically changed the nature of office work and the status of employees. Archives and trade union literature shows that everywhere in Europe, the neckline, personal translation from Kragenlinie, also es gibt keine Möglichkeit auf Englisch oder Französisch Kragenlinie zu übersetzen, also neckline, I think it's okay for everybody, the difference of color, neckline, eroded between the two centuries. So the neckline, the Kragenlinie, is eroded between the two centuries, and most certainly after the First World War. It is well known that the reasons and consequences of this erosion are the core of the German language Marxist theory. It has resulted in the production of specific surveys and employee sociology, unmatched in Europe. It is a very specific German tradition. And my personal feeling is that the reason why you have such a strong investigation to those subjects is really much connected to the previous investments of the political sphere and the Marxist theoretician into the question of the employee middle-class workers since the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. After the Bernstein-Kautsky controversy, the discussion about the eschatological statement according to which the social proletarization of employees is unavoidable and will give rise to proletarian class consciousness in the middle class surfaced once more in the work of Emil Lederer, and as we all had the opportunity to go to in the work of Krakauer, of course, in another way. Basing his arguments on Max Weber, Lederer criticized the extreme simplification induced by historical materialism. And finally, Krakauer and Mills, as a faithful interpreter of Krakauer's proposition in another context, the United States in the 50s, proposed another way to deal with the question of the proletarization. Has the office replaced the factory as the space of modern alienation? Krakauer answers, in a sense, no, but he will say the proletarization of employees is an unquestionable fact. The French sociologist Maurice Halbwachs, in the same period, has conceptualized in terms that what characterizes the alienation of office employees is that their mind, and not only their body, is engaged in the relationship with matter and the materiality of equipments. For Max Weber, as we have mentioned here, the bureaucratization, rationalization of the world is the main reason for disenchantment, and the office is a primary site of alienation. So the majority of the authors during the interwar periods followed, in a sense, the Marxist analysis of the proletarization of the employee condition due to the ongoing mechanization and rationalization of the partly factory-like office space. And I was happy to remember that Harry Braverman did the same, and that you quoted him and was not maybe quoted, but he was a major writer on the history of office, Braverman, in the 70s of the 20th century. While in my sense, sociology must be comprehensive, the historical approach that I chose when I began 20 years ago to work on the history of clerks aimed at accounting for the organized and collective ideas the employees themselves expressed. I also tried to qualify very precisely the socio-historical condition and internal hierarchy within these worlds of employees, not presuming the very existence of the group as such at the beginning of the inquiry investigation. As you may have noticed also, at the core of my question, and I will come back to that at the end of my talk, which will come soon, I hope, for you. I put the question of gender as a key aspect of those transformations. Knowing if the former non-commissioned officers of capital have turned, to use Krakauer's terms, into simple interchangeable soldiers is a relevant issue if one considers that it is not so much an issue of soldiers as of female soldiers. The issue of power and command, but also social and gender arrangements negotiated at the time of the administrative revolution, is essential. It seems to me a key element of those transformations and of the way to interpret them. Gender as a power relationship is strictly, I think, absent from the conference. However it is mentioned, it is not analyzed enough in my sense. It is still possible to speak, as if the universal male, le masculin universel, was still existing when you are speaking about employees. Like Marx, Lederer, Bernstein, Weber, all the predecessors did it. But since 30 years with the approach with gender studies, could we continue to ask questions concerning the way spaces are shaped or equipment used without taking into consideration the fact that you had male, certainly, but also and mainly and more female working in these offices? How could we leave aside the radical transformations that saw over a few generations the sole figure of a male employee, formerly aspiring to become a businessman, replaced by armies of employees and especially female employees? The emblematic figure of the typist being boss, a great female aspiration, and a dead-end job. Thinking of the office without thinking of gender relations is to deny the key role played by the female workforce during this historical period and the way the elites, so all elites, scientific manager, administrative reformator, and in the case of the ministries, for instance, they are not addressing the same kind of personnel than those you will find in a mail order company. So manager and architects, maybe also, we have to look at that, engineers, reconfigure and redefine the office and thus the condition of employee and do it considering the presence of certain kind of employee being here. If the office has an interior, the political economy of this space cannot be made invisible. The architectural, aesthetic and technological dimension of this gender economy still need to be explored and questioned. I would like to go to the question of technology another way, maybe. In my work, I have attempted to characterize the various regimes of use of technologies in the office. And maybe it was the title of these concluding remarks. We should come out of the conference with that ideas of different spaces of spaces. So it is, I am borrowing to the French writer Georges Perec, espèce d'espace. So to be able to more to localize and to look at each of the spaces you are in charge of as porte-parole of your own investigation and spaces, and to deeply construct the facts and the very locality and no locality of what you are looking at. Because I think we have huge variations. That was my idea to deal with these variations between public service, between state, between banking, between insurance company, between car, automobile factories, and we also have historical trends. We have major kind of model, the American one, but we also have strong bureaucratic and cultural identities. So to reconsider all the difficulties that all that provokes to us and to our own fields. What I tried to do in my second book was to look at the history of the technological tools, not in a theological way, not knowing that at the end there will be the revolution administration, but considering in each period the alternatives that were here present. It is very difficult to recover practices and alternatives in history, but it is very important to try to do it, because it is also a way to recover the different utopias, to also produce a kind of possible alternative for today. If you are able to recover alternatives that did exist in the past, of course you can't go back to the past, but I believe very strongly in Donna Haraway's claim in that perspective that we are in the moral obligation to do our job a good way, not to be theological, not to read all the transformation that does occur in the sense that the historical trend will give. We have to speak about that. We have to be able to recover the trend, but we have to be able to be accountable, as Ahaway says, to all alternatives and conflicts that did occur during the period. And maybe that's why I wanted to stress on the trade union alternatives, on the way they did or they did not react to what had happened, or the way employees organized themselves against this transformation. So, however, we have an historical trend, and the direction followed by the social must also be accounted for. In this perspective, and you are right, typing pool, or less frequently calculator pools, and in fact they were calculating pools mainly around the comptometer de Felt et Tarrant. One company was tried to do a kind of calculating pools the same way it was made for the typewriting machine, but it didn't work so much. They are absolutely case bases of or for modernity. Here began, in my sense, the long-term assignments of women to office machines and the regime of office machine use that intensified with the implementation of the workstation and the systematic layout of space. So in that sense, certain offices are the laboratory of modernity in the interwar period. They were places where, in order to process an ever-increasing volume of data, and in particular, massive volumes of individualized alphanumeric data, an anonymous and mechanical production space was established. So it is interesting to look at what employees did do in that space, what was the core of their work. And all the accounting machines and the punch card systems, what they were working on was mainly the processing of large scale of individual alphanumerical data. And it was made in this anonymous world of this new machinery of the office. These new large-scale information processing spaces rely on a mixture of humans and non-humans, a sort of hardware designed to be operated through intensive and specialized feminine work. An entanglement of women, machines, and flows regulates and structures spaces to enable the first form of computational machinery. This specific political economy takes on the necessary obliteration and of the qualification and personality of workers, and mainly of women workers, as you did all in your contribute to show. To implement production at unprecedented rhythm and volumes, you need this kind of infrastructure. And you can't achieve that infrastructure without the support of this implicit political economy. This chapter of the history of information and its technologies still needs to be addressed beyond the time of the electro-accounting technologies after the World War II, when I think we miss, if we enter into the open space office from the architectural perspective a very good way, thanks to your contribution, I think we still miss investigation on what they did really, what kind of work they were doing, and how it works to work in such offices concretely, what kind of production they had, what was the production of these various services during that period of time. It is important because during these years, the space as machinery try is the infrastructure for the next step. It is the early computer time, where you have the same large-scale consuming infrastructures. It reminds us that in order to produce information at a large scale, we needed during the period between the interwar period two the personal computer, a very large technical, material and social organization, and inscribed in physical spaces and factories, in the sense of office factories. I would like to conclude by saying that the issue is still the same, in a sense. The flat world of today's screen, of our laptops, masks the invisible infrastructure, the economy of social and gender relations that relies at an international level on hidden social forms such as intensive pools of repetitive, fragmented and automated activities, which are mostly relegated to the emerging economies. So all for instance, all the work done by our libraries in order to do the numerization of all archives. We know that we have people doing the work in India or wherever in very intensive condition of work in order to have this beautiful access and virtual world and transparent world and new economy of knowledge. So there is indeed a difference between the virtual world and the real world if we forget to think about the real work and those who do it. The history of the office, like that of the workshop before it, enables us to understand how social relation can be expressed within space, but also that space is active in determining social relation. That is the reason why it is important to think about how politically active is a space. When we switch from one utopia to another, utopia with, I don't remember how it's, guillemets, comment on dit les guillemets en anglais? Yes, okay. Utopia, guillemets. Quotation mark. Issues, yes, what kind of utopia and for whom? Issues remain unresolved. Control, power, agency, empowerment, and also domination. These are issues that cannot be addressed without taking into account their distribution amongst agents, human and non-humans, social groups, men and women, workers from here and workers from elsewhere. I would like to end with one quotation of Bruno Latour. Maybe it is a way to use him against him, or when he says that la technologie, c'est la société rendue durable. It is part of the job we have to work with. How is technology, society made durable? So what kind of transformation of the artifact, equipment and space embedded power and control, and is a way to prevent the elite or the management to reformulate rules. And that part of the problem doesn't mean that everything is solved, because I think we have also to work on the consent and of the agency of the people in this space. That is more complicated to go to that in history mainly. But we have still to look at the ways people did have ways to escape, ways to dream, ways to not to be completely submerged, assigned to the place they were supposed to be assigned to. Thank you.